Time now for Morning Rounds with CBS News Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. John LaPook and CBS News contributor Dr. Holly Phillips. First up this morning, a new study shows 40 years after the Vietnam War, more than 250,000 veterans still suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. John has the story of one former serviceman who is still struggling.
When I got out of the service, I got off a plane, and I didn't think about it anymore. I tried to bury it.
But 70-year-old veteran Joe Jackson couldn't bury the year he spent doing ground combat in Vietnam. For the next 2 decades, he felt the urge to be alone, was anxious, and had outbursts of rage.
My oldest daughter, she told me, she said, "Daddy, I think you need to go get some help."
Jackson is one of about 270,000 Vietnam veterans who still suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Psychiatrist Dr. Charles Marmer of NYU Langone and his colleagues at ABT Associates also found about 90,000 of those vets with PTSD have depression.
Are you surprised that 40 years after a war ends, people could still be experiencing PTSD?
I'm not surprised.
Why not?
In the case of PTSD, the longer people struggle, the more likely they are to be depressed, the more likely they are to misuse alcohol, and the more likely they are to have those symptoms disrupt their family life and their work life, which creates further stress.
It wasn't until 1980, 5 years after the end of the Vietnam War, that the condition post-traumatic stress disorder was even identified. 20 years after his service, Jackson finally sought help and is now receiving counseling at an organization called Veterans, Inc.
When I started going counseling, it made it a lot easier for me to accept.
John, is there a way to screen soldiers for the potential risk of PTSD before they actually go into battle?
That's exactly what I asked Dr. Marmer, who helped run the study, and he said they do have a level of screening for most servicemen, and there's a more intensive level of screening for people in the special forces, like the Navy SEALs.
Sure.
But he said clearly we have a lot more to learn because it just doesn't seem to be working well enough right now.
Well, there is new hope in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. More than 5 million Americans live with this devastating illness. Research coming out of the Alzheimer's Association conference in Washington this week looks at an experimental drug. The treatment may, for the first time, attack the underlying cause and slow its progress. So what is this and how does it work?
Right, Vanita, there is a lot of excitement behind this drug. It's called solanezumab, and it is what's known as a monoclonal antibody. It binds a protein known as amyloid, and amyloid is what builds up in the brain of a person who has Alzheimer's. So by binding that protein in the blood, it might lessen the amount that's in the brain. The drug is not a cure. It doesn't necessarily reverse the symptoms, but it has been shown that in people who have early stages of Alzheimer's, it can slow down the progression of the disease, which is, of course, incredibly important. It would be an injection that's given every 4 weeks. And really, the reason people are so excited about it is that it does seem to target the underlying cause of the disease. So many of the treatments we have right now really focus only on the symptoms.
Right. So, John, what does this actually tell us about the actual cause of the disease?
Well, it's not absolutely clear. So when I spoke to Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, who's a big researcher at Duke about this, he said there's excitement because there's a little bit of a signal. It's not a huge effect, and we don't want to use the term cure for this.
Right.
But it does help support the idea that the changes in the brain that happen with Alzheimer's happen about 20 years before you have symptoms. So if you go back and start using some of the treatments that are failures now, the thought is if you give them earlier, maybe they'll help, because giving them now when somebody is late in the stage of Alzheimer's, like giving Lipitor to somebody who's had 5 heart attacks and heart failure, it's just too late. If you go back earlier, before all that damage is done, maybe then it'll work.
So how soon till patients could get this?
Right. Well, now the drug is entering its second phase 3 study, about 2,100 patients, but the results won't really be out for the next 18 months. Although if the study does prove to be effective, researchers can then start the regulatory approval process. Still, it'll probably be many years before we see this drug on the market.
European regulators approved the world's first malaria vaccine yesterday. The vaccine, created by GlaxoSmithKline, has proved effective in protecting young children from the life-threatening disease for up to 4 years. With the approval, the World Health Organization is now expected to coordinate the vaccine's use in Africa. This is big news.
Yeah, I am absolutely lit up about this. Malaria kills about 600,000 people a year in sub-Saharan Africa. Most of them are kids. And this vaccine has an efficacy of about 30%. You could say, well, that's only 30%, but 30% of 600,000, we're talking about potentially saving 200,000 lives a year, mostly kids. So I'm seeing, you know, this is kind of flying under the radar in terms of the headlines. The headlines are malaria vaccine approved. I think it should be malaria vaccine approved. Right. This is huge. Yeah. It's huge, and I think I'm so excited. Later on, they're going to get an even better vaccine, but for now, I think this is terrific.
It's certainly, I mean, I think anything that could prevent malaria will have to rank among the greatest medical advancements in a century. It's huge.
All right, next up, does fatherhood make you fat? Well, I can answer that question. Yes. A study out this week finds that new dads gain about 4 pounds. They're lucky, on average, while non-fathers actually lose a little weight. Now, I blamed this, John, on sleep deprivation. Yeah. Am I accurate?
Well, it could be part of it, because if you have sleep deprivation, you may have an increased risk of obesity. I think there are two main factors, again, in my own personal experience. Mac and cheese. Okay, I finish more mac and cheese on my kids' plates. And of course, also, you come home, it's a long day, and instead of taking a run, you want to be with the kids. There are a lot of factors.
If you only gain 4 pounds, you're lucky. I think I gained 15.
You know, it's really hard for us to cry you guys a river on this one. All right, finally, new research suggests that your iTunes library may offer a bit of insight into the way you think. Psychologists at Cambridge University found that empathizers, people who focus on the emotions of others, prefer more mellow and, quote, unpretentious songs like Jeff Buckley's Take on Hallelujah, Come Away With Me by Norah Jones, and Queen's Crazy Little Thing Called Love.
On the other hand, systemizers, those are people who like to analyze rules and patterns in the world, enjoyed music with high energy and complexity. Songs like Vivaldi's Concerto in C, God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols, and Metallica's Enter Sandman.
All I want to know is, what does my playlist say about me? I didn't hear any of the old school hip hop there, right? I've got Biggie, I got Snoop, Dre, Nas, whatever.
Of all the artists you would have mentioned, that surprises me the most.
Maybe I'm more of a systemizer with that. It's high energy, for sure.
I think I'm more of an empathizer. I think, you know, You've Got a Friend, those kind of mellow songs. But I have to say, Enter Sandman, Mariano Rivera. Yeah. That's my song. That's my guy.
How can you not like the Sex Pistols? That's all I got to say.